How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Perfect Reload Weekly, where we take a look back at the week in video game news. My name is Steve, and I'm slightly sleepy, so forgive me. I am joined, as always, by the number one possessed television in all of the internet, Christian Slater. Christian, this week, how you doing?
I don't know what game you were playing last night, but hearing you scream was so satisfying. I think that's a high I'm going to chase. It's nice to find purpose again.
Great. Thanks, man. That's real nice of you to know that you take pleasure in my misery. I really wouldn't be surprised any other way, to be honest with you. But yes, we are back. We are here, and it's been a spectacular, amazing Spider Week. So last episode, I talked about kind of my initial thoughts with Spider-Man 2, and now here we are a week later, and I have finished the game. I have 100%ed it, gotten my platinum trophy, and all of that good stuff. So we are going to dive into a very spoiler-filled discussion of Spider-Man 2, as we always do whenever we finish a game here on the show. So there will be timestamps on the video to let you know when the Spider-Man 2 talk begins and ends, so you can skip if you don't want to get spoiled on anything. I guess here we go. I can just type it in. It doesn't need to be that dramatic. So let's see. Where do I want to start with this game? Because this was kind of like a big whirlwind. I got through this game like pretty fast, just in a matter of days. I finished the main story, and then I took a few days off before Saturday afternoon. I found myself with some free time with nothing to do, and that was when I crossed off the last of the stuff to get the platinum and 100% everything. I had just 2 or 3 of the final side missions to kind of tackle. The symbiote nests and the Mysteriums, and I think I had a handful of spider bots I still needed to find, and then it wrapped everything up, and I think it was actually like really fitting. I did the Mysteriums last. Actually, the way I did it was I did it in a clockwise motion around the map. I would do the symbiote Mysterium, and kind of work my way around, and I figured I would do the final Mysterium last because I knew that there was actually story elements to it, whereas the symbiote nest, when you finish it, there's no cutscene or anything. It's just hey, you finished it and you unlocked a suit. So I was like, all right, well, if there's a story kind of cutscene thing attached to this, I'll finish the Mysterium last. And when you finish, you end up perched on top of the Mysterium building in Coney Island. And I thought that was a really fitting way for me to personally end the game, because I thought the Coney Island section in the game was my favorite moment of the game. I thought it was just a really cool slice of life moment. You got to see into the lives of friends reconnecting, and some have secrets to hide, and some are uneasy with how to interact with each other after being away for so long. And I just thought it was a really nice piece of humanity in a superhero game where everything is over the top and cranked up to 11 for a lot of the time. And, it gets very serious very fast. And I just thought that there was kind of a fitting way to end that game with Miles perched up on the Mysterium looking out at Coney Island, because you don't get to see Miles take on Coney Island during that mission. He is supposed to be there to go visit Haley's art exhibition, and he is unable to do so. So it was the threat is over, and now he finally gets to look out upon Coney Island. So it's just my mind, role play of the game, I guess. But I just thought it was kind of a nice moment. So, overall thoughts are, I was trying to figure out how to talk about this game without just using way too much hyperbole. But it is, and quite simply, it's one of the best games I've ever played. When I finished that first game, however many years ago, 2018, I think is when it came out, I was like, man, I think this is the first game since Mass Effect 2 that's going to like crack my all-time personal top 10 list. I had never wanted to 100% a game before, or platinum trophy a game. It just didn't matter to me. I had done it because there are some games where it's just like the Telltale games, like you would just do it automatically by finishing each chapter, right? So I mean, it wasn't like you were having to go out of your way to do it, but with Spider-Man, I never wanted to do everything you could possibly do in a game before until that game. I wanted to cover every inch of that map. I wanted to do absolutely everything that the game had to offer to me. And that was actually a really interesting year because the same thing happened similar to because Red Dead 2 came out that year. And that was the first time I had ever finished a game where I immediately started it again. I had turned it off. Well, the game had ended. And instead of continuing out in the open world, I started a fresh save immediately. Was the first Spider-Man, I was just like, this is just an unbelievable game. It's just everything I want out of an action game. It's everything I would want out of a superhero game, especially as somebody who's really fallen off of the superhero thing. I won't rehash the conversation too much because I think I talked about it last week, but I was big into comic books when I was a kid. Would go to comic book stores and all that stuff. And then when I was in my 20s, I ended up working at a comic book store for a little while. And then, there was just, at that time, there was just a lot of interesting stuff happening in the comic book world. And so I was buying, I had a subscription box at a local store and was getting probably like $50 worth of comics a week for a while. Then I kind of fell out of it, and I would read stuff here and there. I'd pick up like a graphic novel and all that. What's it's actually funny is because I really don't want this Spider-Man journey to end right now. So short of just starting the game over again, I haven't finished it because I didn't realize how long it was, but I started watching that Across the Spider-Verse movie. And then I was out running errands the other day, and I was like, let me stop at a bookstore and see if I can find like a modern Spider-Man or modern Miles Morales graphic novel that maybe has some of the influence that they took for the game. I couldn't find one, but I ended up kind of browsing around online through some digital comic book stuff. And it's like now I found myself like last night I was reading a comic book. I was like, I haven't done this in a really long time. So it's definitely, Spider-Man is definitely on the brain right now because I just didn't want this game to end. And what's funny is because I know there was like some complaints about people saying how short this game was. I checked when I finished yesterday, so it was 23 hours to get my 100% platinum. I had finished the story in 18, 19, something like that. So, I mean, I think it's shorter than the first game, but I also feel like it's a better game and a better story than the first game. So I'm not concerned about that. Would I like to have had more of the game? Sure, but maybe that would have bloated the story, and the story is very nicely paced. So I really wouldn't want to make any changes to that at all. So, I mean, I think it's safe to say at this point, I love that first game. And, it's one of my all-time favorite games, and so is this. This is a game that I'm going to go back to time and time again throughout the rest of my time playing video games, during my life. I loved every moment of it. I thought it was just truly, truly special. So I took some notes, and I'm going to reference them here. Some of them I wrote before I finished the game, so I kind of want to read through them to make sure I'm not answering my own question. But so Kraven was the biggest question mark I had. Kraven is my favorite Spider-Man villain. I was really concerned about how well they were going to do him because he has gotten pushed to the side for the most part. Wasn't in the first game, wasn't in Miles Morales, isn't in any of the MCU movies or anything like that. He's kind of at this point become like not even a B tier villain, but like a C tier villain. You just don't see him. And I know that they have that solo Kraven movie coming out, which looks terrible. And I think that it's going to be so funny to see that the video game side of Sony's Spider-Man interests can nail this character and knock it out of the park, and their movie side is going to fail it so bad. It's going to be, I would be surprised if it does better than Morbius. I would assume it's going to do worse at the theater than Morbius will, or that it did. I think that it's arguably the best depiction of Kraven ever. I loved what they did with his story. When you're doing the hunter blind missions, you get some backstory stuff about his family. God, what side mission is it? what do they call them? The one where you're chasing the drones. I know they have a name, but it's the one where you have to track down the drones. And eventually you find out that it's all leading towards the chameleon, and they kept this in the comics, and they kept this in the game. He's Kraven's half brother. So they really did a lot to kind of build Kraven up in this game and give him this cool backstory. You know, his whole thing is, you know, he's always trying to get the most dangerous prey. You know, he wants to test his mettle as a hunter. But in this game, what they did was he has cancer and he wants to have his greatest fight before he dies. He wants to die at the hands of the one piece of prey that he could not hunt, that in turn essentially hunts him. And I thought that was such a really, really nice touch. He was not overly cheesy as a villain. Sure, he had some like one-liners in there. That's just kind of the Marvel thing. That's a very Spider-Man thing to do. I don't think it detracted at all. I never like groaned or cringed at anything that he said. I think the performance by the actor was very good. And it was just... they made him feel very, very powerful. The times you interact with him, you know, it's a difficult boss fight. He is a difficult character to deal with. And I think when he finally meets his demise at the hands of Venom, you know, you see the joy in his eyes as he knows he's about to die. And also you see that kind of relief that his hunt is now over and he can kind of pass, you know, through the veil as it may. And they give him a brutal fucking death. Like, I mean, him being decapitated is just like, I didn't expect that. I thought he was just going to snap his neck, or, you know, I figured with Venom, the way Venom is, as they had been showing him, you know, he's just throwing bodies left and right. I figured he was just going to snap his neck and toss him like he was a piece of garbage, you know, because to him, he's not any different than the random military generic faceless drones that he's been fighting, right? Like he doesn't care who Kraven is. So I figured he was just going to treat him like it was nothing and just toss him. But to see him actually like decapitate him and the body drop, I was like, oh man, like that was, geez, like I did not expect that, but I thought that was a really cool way to finish off the Kraven arc of the game. I also really like the fact that he didn't die off halfway through the story. You know, Venom is not introduced until very late in the game. It's really in the home stretch that Venom even becomes a factor, to the point where it was so late in the game that I genuinely thought that they were going to really pull a twist and that Peter was going to be Venom and not Harry. You know, the predictable thing was that it was going to be Harry because it was foreshadowed so hard at the end of the first game. And obviously in the game, he gets the symbiote suit and all that stuff. You know, they're conducting all these experiments on him. But for a while, I was like, oh man, I think it's going to be Peter becomes Venom, and it's going to be Miles against Peter for the final fight. And they obviously go the other direction, but I thought Venom was introduced very well. I think that the brilliance in introducing Venom in this game was that you get to control Venom. You get to become the villain for a while in the game. You just go on this like murderous rampage, just destroying this private security force. And his moveset is just pure brutality. I mean, you can throw human beings into another human. You can throw them into they amp up the destructibility of the environments, more so that you have when you're playing as Peter or Miles. And it's just like this cacophony of violence, you know, as you're introduced to Venom. And then, you know, they snap that away. They take that away from you. That power is taken away from you, and you're back to playing as Peter or Miles, who are very powerful in this game. That's one of the things that this game nails really well, is the sense of power. There are moments where you are just dominating your enemies, even as Peter or Miles, not just as Venom, where you really show that, like, oh, these are superheroes with superhuman abilities. They should be just wrecking shop on your standard average human being enemy. And they do that really well. The first time you get the symbiote powers as Peter, and you hear like the growling noises coming through the speaker and the controller, which could be this very laughable, cheesy thing. And I think as you do it more and more, it kind of becomes like, oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, they're kind of doing that like dog growling noise. But the first time it happens, like you're like, ah, yeah, kind of like you're kind of into it. You know, it's like, oh yeah, definitely. So, you know, those moments in this game are just incredible. And it's funny because, you know, I've talked about it a little bit. You know, we're a little bit over a month away from when I'm going to be doing my game of the year stuff. And I was like, oh, let's do like a best moments category this year, because there's been a lot of games that have had some amazing set pieces and things. And I started like tallying them up, and I was like, should I just do a category that's just best Spider-Man moment? Because there's like 10 of them that could win on on this list. There's just so many great set pieces, great moments that aren't even they're not full of action. They're just full of being out in that world and experiencing, life as one of the Spider-Men. And it's just, it's a really nice blend of all of that. So let's get into a little bit of the negative with the story. And I'm gonna be honest, there's not much, but there are points that I think, kind of got dropped off by the wayside. So Miles kind of drops off the second half of the game. And it's tough to say the second half of the game. I think this game should really be divided into thirds. It's kind of like a play in that, where you have like a Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So I would say maybe towards the end of like Act 2 and then in Act 3, he comes around at the end. But a large chunk of the game becomes very much about Peter and Harry. And MJ kind of gets tossed to the side. She comes back around a little bit sooner than Miles does, because she does have multiple playable sections. And for those that didn't like the MJ stealth stuff in the first game, rest assured they have fixed that, because they have turned her into John Wick in this game. They give her a gun, and she is a fucking surgeon with that thing. So don't feel bad about having to replay some boring stealth stuff, because she is kicking ass just as much as anybody else in this game. But you do really get wrapped up in this Peter Harry thing, and Miles really kind of dissolves into the only time you are playing as him is if you are actively like switching to him when you open up the menu to switch to the other character to do the open world stuff. The story stuff really just kind of becomes Harry and Peter for a while, but Miles has come back. Miles is crucial to the end of the game. He does come back in a very big way, and they we'll get into the ending of the game in a bit, but they really make Miles feel super important at the end of the game. I don't know if it necessarily makes up by kind of dropping him out of the story for a large chunk of it, but it shows that they didn't just, it's not an afterthought. It was by design. I think what they were trying to do was to make it feel like Peter is so wrapped up in having his best friend back that he doesn't have time for Miles. But I think they could have accomplished that in a different way. We're still allowing you to see kind of what's going on through the lens of Miles. But, it is what it is. Genki and Haley really fall off the last third of the game. Neither one of them get a great satisfactory conclusion. Like Genki kind of has like this like moment of confession when he gets saved by Miles, and they kind of reaffirm their friendship. And the Haley stuff ends with like her and Miles like kind of settling on the fact that they're going to be like a romantically involved couple. It's kind of an awkward conversation. And then so there's 2 post-credit scenes, and the last of the post-credit scenes, I guess it does kind of confirm that they are together as a couple. Because there's this thread throughout the game of Miles's mom getting back out and dating after the death of her husband, and she wants Miles to be there for dinner when she introduces him, and that finally happens, and Haley is there. So it's kind of like, hey, I'm bringing my new boyfriend, why don't you bring your girlfriend, kind of thing. So I guess it kind of confirms that. I do like the fact that you actually get to play as Haley at one point in the game. And I think it's like a really great representation of a deaf character. There's no sound really during that section. They use a lot of visual cues and clues. They do these kind of like emoji stickers to kind of show like, match the emotion to the facial expression and all that stuff. And I think that was a really nice break from things. And I think it was a cool thing to do. You actually like the amount of characters you play as in this game, like it's kind of surprising. Like you play as quite a few different characters, Haley's a one-off, but you get to play as MJ, and you get to play as Venom, and you get to play as Miles and Peter, and I was like, oh, okay, it's like actually like quite a bit of variety in here, so that was pretty nice. Let's see here. So the side mission stuff, I've been trying to wrap my brain around this. So Peter gets involved with this cult side mission that reintroduces Yuri from the first game, who has now taken up the sort of, I guess you would say, anti-hero mantle of Wraith. that is an established comic book thing. It's not new for the game. And she is hunting down this cult, and she claims that she has a personal relationship, not like a romantic one, but like knows who the leader of this cult is. And I figured it out immediately, and I don't think that that's a big leap. I think most people probably figured out who this guy was immediately. He has red hair and has a design on his shirt that looks like the symbiote, like it's Cletus Cassidy. So I was super excited. I was like, oh my God, like they're giving us Carnage in this game too. Like that's insane. And you don't see him become Carnage. But I think they did it really cool where, you know, he kind of outsmarts Peter and gets away with a piece of the symbiote. So that shows you how it's going to attach to him. And they're talking about like his real name's not Cletus Cassidy. It's just one of the many aliases he has used, and he has gone off into the world. And that really sets up like a big thing of like, hey, in the next game, Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage, is probably going to be a thing. I don't think that they don't include that. I think that would be very weird to not include that in the next game. Or to do it is DLC. I think they very well could do, like they did the Black Cat DLC for the first game. They could do a Carnage DLC if they don't want to have him be, you know, in the next game, the next like proper game. So let's see. Yeah, so the cult thing, you know, that's like a big, it's not too many missions. I think it's like 3 or 4 missions, but Miles doesn't really have an equivalent. The only thing I could say he does is Miles has this thing where he's trying to recover instruments from famous jazz musicians for this cultural museum in Harlem. And I think that they were trying to make that the equivalent of the Peter Parker cult thing, but it's not as many missions and it doesn't feel as important. I think they could have done more to make it feel, I don't know, a little bit more special. It is cool, like when the museum is finally complete, you get to walk through it and interact with the exhibits, and you know there are real musicians and stuff. So I think it's just like maybe because it has Carnage tied to it and the introduction of Yuri as Wraith, that maybe it just feels more important because it's introducing like these major characters, whereas Miles's museum stuff does not. So maybe it just feels disjointed in that regard, but it would have been nice to get Miles to have maybe a little bit more, you know, going on the side of the main missions. But you know, even still, I think, you know, they told a great story, you know, even with those kind of minor gripes in there. So let's get into the ending of the game. So they defeat Venom. They get the symbiote suit off of Harry after this very wild and dramatic fight. And Harry is left, I guess, in a coma. He's still alive, so I assume it's a coma. And Norman Osborn is, you know, enraptured, you know, with what happened, and he is blaming Spider-Man for putting Harry in this predicament. I think the fact that they're portraying Norman as not knowing that Peter Parker as Spider-Man is ridiculous. When Norman gets Harry into the ambulance at the end of the game, Mary Jane and Peter Parker as in the Spider-Man costume are holding hands right in front of him. And then the next day you see Mary Jane and Peter holding hands, consoling each other in Harry's room, and Norman comes in and is not like, you bastard Spider-Man. Like, how does he not know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man at this point? Like, that seemed really weird and kind of took me out of things. Maybe he does, and he's just too wrapped up with grief to get into it at that point. But he calls up a scientist and mentions Project G or whatever it is, something G. And you assume that that's going to be Green Goblin. They are going to inject a serum either into himself or into Harry. I think it would be more interesting to inject it into Harry and have Harry become Green Goblin instead of Norman. So that's a little bit selfish on my end. I'm not a big Green Goblin fan. I think it's just been done to death in the movies way too much. And I'm just kind of done with Green Goblin as a villain. It's kind of like Batman and Joker, like show me something new. So I think it would be more interesting to have Harry be Green Goblin because he's been so tortured with going through the symbiote stuff, almost killing him and just engulfing him, that if you really want him to be this like tortured soul, that really is just pissed off at everything, like have him go through the horrors of being Green Goblin and fighting his best friend, as Spider-Man. I think that would be the more interesting thing. And then you see in a post-credit scene, Norman goes to visit Otto Octavius at the Raft, which is their big prison. And, Otto's got a plan for how he's going to come back. His final chapter, that final chapter has been used in the comics. It's actually referencing a very unloved by the fans storyline. So I hope they don't go with that unless they can put their own twist on it. The Sinister Six is gone. Craven has killed all of them throughout the course of this game. He kills Scorpion and kills Rhino and Electro and all that. So I think, we're going to get Green Goblin and Doc Ock is the main villains going forward. And I'm sure they'll probably toss in some side villains like they have with every game, so far. And then there's a post credit scene where that date that I mentioned earlier with Rio and her new boyfriend and Miles and Haley. And I think they were leading you to believe throughout this entire game that the man that was going to show up was going to be one of Spider-Man's foes. And I was kind of going through my mind and I was just like, who is it going to be? Because they've burned through so many of the biggest villains that Spider-Man has, but I was like, Mr. Negative in the first game was a newer villain. Maybe there's just a newer villain that I'm not familiar with that is very popular these days in the Miles Morales, comic books. And so I was like, okay, maybe that'll be it, but it's not. It's Albert Moon, and then he says, "This is my daughter, Cindy." Cindy Moon is Silk, essentially the third Spider-Man out in the world. So the way I am proposing that this is probably going to end up happening is if they do DLC for this game, like the Black Cat stuff, then I think it'll be Carnage. I think that would be a good way to wrap that story up so you don't have to worry about reintroducing the symbiote into the next game now that it's kind of over and done with the end of Venom. They kind of clean that up. So I think that's probably what you see. I think they probably do a Miles Morales 2. I imagine that's probably what they're going to end up doing. If they do that, then I think it's going to be Miles and Silk. And they'll keep the two playable characters thing, and you'll bounce between Miles and Silk, especially because now at the end of the actual ending of the game before the credits, Peter is not necessarily retiring as Spider-Man, but he is done. He is like, if you need some advice, I guess I'll kind of be there for you, but you got this. He doesn't necessarily say he's done being Spider-Man forever, but he's going to go off and live a normal life with Mary Jane. He's going to start a science research foundation, and that's kind of going to be how they go forward. MJ starting her podcast, and they're going to kind of live a nice suburban normal life up in Queens. So I think you get Miles and Silk in Miles Morales 2, and he's kind of showing her the ropes. And then I think at the very end of Miles Morales 2, something bad happens and that game ends on a cliffhanger of him calling Pete, and Pete has to become Spider-Man again. And then in Spider-Man 3, it's Silk, Miles Morales, and Peter Parker, and they are up against Doc Ock and Green Goblin. And I think that's probably what you're going to get. I think that's a pretty good way to wrap things up, because I would honestly be surprised if they do another Spider-Man game beyond Spider-Man 3. I think that game's gonna be so far out in the future. I think from what we've heard, Wolverine is gonna be like 2025. And so you're looking at 2027, 2028 for Spider-Man 3. At that point, they're going to want to do another Ratchet and Clank in there at some point. They're going to have to, I imagine Wolverine's going to go gangbusters for them. They're going to want to transition to that. And who knows if Marvel is like, hey, our video games have been failing horribly. Our movies are not getting the traction they once were. Can you please kind of save the MCU for us and maybe give them the ability to do something else? But the other counterpoint to that is I wonder if they actually would, because those games would be PlayStation exclusive. So I don't know, maybe they work out some business deal there like they have with, the MCU's ability to use Spider-Man, despite the fact that Spider-Man in terms of film is a Sony property. So I don't know, there could be some weird contractual stuff in there, but I imagine that we're going to get 3 Spider-Man games, and that'll be it. Unfortunately, I could play these games for the rest of my life, so I would love to have as many as possible, but I don't think that is that's going to be the case. So I eagerly await whatever they do next. I imagine it'll be some DLC and then maybe Miles Morales 2. I'm also very much looking forward to Wolverine. Wolverine was one of my favorite comic book characters growing up. I think it's going to be a nice change of pace for them because I think Wolverine will be more like a Ratchet game than it will Spider-Man, because I don't think it's going to be open world. Wolverine doesn't go around saving people. I guess you could say he rides a motorcycle, but I mean, he doesn't have a fast method of transportation to get around the city. So I think that's going to be a more kind of like mission-based type thing. The last thing I will say about my thoughts on the future is whatever they do next with Miles Morales, they're going to have to loop that Black Cat stuff around. Black Cat, there's a major tease with Doctor Strange and Wong in the game. There's a big moment at the Sanctum Sanctorum, and Black Cat has some very Doctor Strange-esque powers going on where they tie in the technology from Ratchet and Clank with Spider-Man in one of the coolest moments in the game. And they just kind of drop that off. There's a very quick phone call that's kind of like, hey, Black Cat, you okay? And she's like, yep, I'm okay. It's like, okay, cool, great, okay, bye. Like that, they're gonna have to loop that back around in there. So maybe we'll see some of that, but yeah, this was an absolutely fantastic game. I could go on for a long time. I do highly suggest 100%ing it. The Mysterium stuff is really cool. The final boss fight against Mysterio is awesome. You get a lot of cool story stuff, like finishing the Spider-Bot stuff ties in Spider-Verse movie stuff that becomes very apparent in there. Yeah, if you're a Spider-Man fan and you want a ton of Easter eggs and lore and all that stuff, this game's got plenty of it for you. So that'll wrap up the talk on Spider-Man. Now that we are done with the game, Christian, do you have any thoughts before we move on?
With how animalistic Venom was portrayed in this game, I feel it's a really touching commentary on how I feel inside. It's like I'm a trapped panther waiting to be uncaged. I need to roam free and stalk my prey. I miss the hunt, man, and Daddy needs it back.
Yeah, I don't really think of you as a predator, man. Like, I could pretty much negate any attack you could do by just putting a box over you. I took away your arms, so what are you gonna do, man? I could just cut your ratchet straps, and then you're just lifeless on a shitty couch that we found on the side of the road. So that's cool, man. I guess it's nice that you can live vicariously through the power of video games. All right, now that the Spider-Man stuff is out of the way, let's move on to some of the other games that came out, because we actually have quite a bit. Thankfully, there was another light news week, but a heavy on the games week. So the Finals was an open beta, and I put a video up on the channel. So the Finals has been talked about for a while now, blending some cool 3v3v3 gameplay, first-person shooter, competitive first-person shooter with a lot of destructibility. It's an objective-based gameplay. At least in the beta, they don't have any straight-up team deathmatch or domination modes or anything like that. I really enjoyed my time with it. I would have liked to have played more of it, but with the other stuff that came out this week, it just wasn't in the cards. So I eagerly am awaiting the final release of the game. Not sure when that is happening, but I think it is definitely something to check out. I don't know when the beta ends. I couldn't find any information on it. It didn't say anywhere, and hopefully it's sooner rather than later, but I get the feeling it's probably going to be after the first of the year, maybe next spring. Maybe we get another beta going after, in January or something like that. And then, the game comes kind of comes out in the spring. I think that they or would be wise to avoid Call of Duty this year. Let them kind of have the spotlight for a while. And then, when it dies down a little bit, once people kind of settled in and even dropped off of the game after a couple of months, put yourself out there and try and scoop those people up. I think it has a really good shot of setting itself apart and becoming like the next big first-person shooter out there in the competitive space. I think it's more interesting than X-Defiant, and especially with X-Defiant kind of falling off right now with getting the multiple delays and kind of losing some of its goodwill. And I think just overall between playing the two, I think the Finals is a better playing game. I think moving around feels better in that game. It's a little bit more bright and colorful. I like the announcer stuff. I'm sure it would probably wear old after a while, but I really did enjoy my time with it more than X-Defiant. And it's not another battle royale shooter, so it's not really competing in that sense against Fortnite and Apex and PUBG. It's still going to fight for people's time just because it is a first-person, online shooter, but it does enough different that I think it could probably carve out its own thing. I guess the closest analog would maybe be Overwatch 2. And Overwatch 2 was not super well received. So I think that this has the ability to probably just, take whatever audience that has away from it. And at least for a little while, I think it's going to be the hot thing. We'll see what they do with updates and all that to keep it going. But I would say for at least the first month or two, it's going to be a pretty big deal once it finally comes out. I think it's going to be a heavily streamed game. I would not be surprised if they are lining up a list of well-known streamers to stream that game as part of a paid promotion type thing. So I imagine that, your Twitch feeds and, if you're watching YouTube streams and all that, probably be heavily dominated by the finals once it comes out. But, I think that's probably a good route to take for the game. So yeah, if the beta is now closed and you can't get into it, check out my video. I don't play great during it, but it does give you an idea of what the game is about and what it's like, and try and get yourself into to the next time they open it up. All right, next up after that, another game that we put a video up, UFC 5, and I hated how negative I came across in that video, especially towards IGN's review. But something about it just broke in my brain, where I just could not figure out how they gave this game a 9 out of 10. It seemed just so bizarre to me. It reuses way too much of the older games. There's a lot of laziness in the game of just keeping some dialogue verbatim from previous games. No new additions whatsoever to the creative fighter mode. No new hairstyles, no new tattoos, no new mouth guards, no anything, no new beards, just nothing. There's really no incentive to create characters in that game unless, you just want to do it for the career mode. I think the career mode, I didn't play too much more of it after finishing that video, but I mean, it's not super different than the one before. It's still the same story. It still opens in the same way. I could not believe that they opened that thing the same way as the last games, where you're doing that outside fight underneath the overpass. I was like, I could not believe it's like they talked up so much about how much better the story mode is, or the career mode is, and it was getting such high praises in that review. And I was like, what is this guy talking about? And that review is like, oh man, there's blood on the mats. And it's like, that's been in the game. And the one thing I didn't check on the video, and I checked on my own time, was he was talking about the Kumite mode, which returned, which was kind of a no grappling strikes only mode. He was like, oh, it's so different than the last Kumite mode, and it makes you feel more like you're in the movie Bloodsport. And I was like, oh shit, they must have done something cool with this. And I opened it up, it's exactly the same. This guy in his review is like, oh, I've played so many of the UFC games for so long. I'm a super experienced UFC player. And it's like, I don't think you've ever played any of them before, because all these things that you're talking about is saying that they are new in this game have been in the games before. Like, what? I don't know. I was very surprised. I do not think UFC 5 is worth $70. If you have Game Pass, you can download the 10-hour trial and play it that way. I think mechanically it's a good playing MMA game. It is enjoyable in that regard. So if you're going to take it online, play a lot of online fights, play with your friends, all that stuff, you're going to get your money out of it. And it's a good product in that regard. But I think it's a tremendous step backwards with them just not really adding anything else. It's microtransaction to hell. Instead of relying on making modes better or adding new features to the game, instead it's just a lot of like daily challenges, weekly challenges, that kind of stuff. And it's just not what I'm looking for. So it's not for me. When it eventually hits Game Pass in a year, I'm sure I'll probably put plenty of time into it, because sports games are my bread and butter for getting through my podcasts and watching movies, or not movies, but watching my YouTube feed and getting caught up on stuff, putting them on mute and just getting through, my slice of entertainment for the day or whatever. So I'm sure eventually I'll put a bunch of time into this game, but as it stands right now, I would not buy it unless you are committed to playing online and committed to just wanting to interact with it from a gameplay perspective, and you don't need the dog and pony show of a solid career mode and new features to create a fighter and stuff like that. If you're okay with just doing the one-on-one fights, then absolutely run out and buy it, because it looks great. It plays very well. There's a lot of positives going for it. It was just it's all the trimmings around it are disappointing. Christian, I know you had some some thoughts on UFC. What's on your mind?
I didn't see any crazy kicks or punches in this game that I can't do in real life. I think I'm going to sign up for Muay Thai classes and become the king of Thailand by 2025. I'd like to end up on a History Channel top 10 once I'm overthrown.
You are definitely going to end up on a History Channel top 10 at some point in your life, but it's not going to be because of your Muay Thai skills, because once again, as a reminder, you don't have limbs. I took them away from you because you lost them as punishment for being a douche. So next up is a game that I truly did not anticipate checking out, but I kind of got caught up in the hype, not so much for the game, but for, I guess, for lack of better term, even though I hate using this term, controversy surrounding it. Alan Wake 2. So I talked about this last year a lot, where I was trying to branch out of my comfort zone and embrace different genres of games that I do typically not play, horror games being one of them. Now, I love horror movies. I've definitely dropped off of modern horror. I kind of stick to my classics from the 80s, but I do try to keep current with some of the big horror movies out there. I watched, what was it? Not Annabelle, Megan this year, the Killer Doll. I thought that was pretty good. I just watched the new Saw a week ago or so, and I thought that was actually very, very good. So I try to keep current with stuff, but I just not a big fan of a lot of modern horror. I don't like being scared. I like horror movies that are fun, like slashers killing people and all that stuff. I like that. I don't really like being scared. Like, you're never going to see me at like what's that thing? The Halloween Horror Nights down at Universal. Like, I don't play with that. I had a very traumatic experience as a child in one of those kind of haunted house things where I freaked the fuck out and needed to get out of there immediately because I was way too scared. So I'm not big into being scared. But Alan Wake 2. So let's talk about the controversy first. So it's not really controversy. It's just kind of the most, I guess, appropriate term, even though it doesn't really fit the description. Alan Wake 2 on PC, on the console version, it doesn't matter. But on PC, it is an incredibly demanding game. And it's upsetting a lot of people because, the current crop of graphics cards, the 40 series graphics cards, are very, very expensive. More than double what the 30 series cards cost. I paid, was it $600 or $700 for my 3080, and if I want a 4080, it'd be like $1,000 more than that, and probably a couple $100. It's close to $2,000 if I wanted a 4090. Out of curiosity, I looked it up the other day. I would like to think that even though my PC is a few years old at this point, I built it in 2020 with a minor upgrade this year for a new CPU. I have a 5900X, 64 gigs of RAM, and a 3080 in there. I like to think that I'm still able to play things perfectly fine. I played Red Dead Redemption 2, no problem. Cyberpunk this year, no problem. But man, Alan Wake 2 is bringing this thing to its knees. If I want, I can play it on medium settings at barely 30 frames a second. I'm averaging anywhere between 32 and 40 frames a second. So certainly playable, but it doesn't look great. It does not look as good as I'm sure what the Xbox version looks like. I've seen what the PlayStation 5 version looks like. That looks very nice. And which is sad because my PC setup is better than the graphical capabilities of the PlayStation 5. So it was a little bit disappointing with that. Trying to play this game in ultra wide, that's not going to happen. So I'm having to play it windowed, tiny on my screen in a 1080 screen. I cannot get it to run in 1440p without plummeting below 30 frames a second. I've messed with ray tracing settings, from turning them all the way down, to trying to mess with DLSS stuff to try and increase my frame rate, different scalable resolutions and things like that. I tried moving it over to my 4K monitor. That was a fucking disaster. I moved it over to the 4K monitor and it dipped down to 5 frames a second. So I was like, all right, well, I definitely can't run this on my other monitor, which means I cannot run it via Play Night and Moonlight onto my TV in the living room if I want to play this game on the living room TV. That is not going to happen, which sucks. So I am stuck at my desk having to play it. So that's kind of the big part of it, is just a lot of people are kind of finding out that, like, hey, some of these modern PC games are going to require you to have cutting edge hardware to play them at an acceptable rate. Is that right? Not necessarily, but that's going to be what happens. I think this is the first big game where the 10 series cards are just no longer, you just can't play them. It just doesn't work anymore. I can't imagine what it would be like to play this on a 20 series card. I imagine you're playing on low settings in 1080p. You know, I've seen footage of what this thing looks like being run at max settings, and it is ungodly pretty. I mean, it is one of the nicest looking games probably ever made. It's very, very nice. And I'm getting a lot of that detail, you know, in my windowed version of the game. But a lot of like the foliage in the woods is really low quality, despite the fact that I have that texture quality. It defaulted it to high for me. But there's so many graphical artifacts happening because it's struggling to keep up that it kind of takes away from the overall experience. But you know, I'm going to try and play more of it. If I ultimately like really get invested in the game, I'll just push through it. If not, maybe I just kind of lay off and like catch it on sale on the PS5 or something later on. So, you know, we'll see on that. But in terms of the game stuff, man, like within a few minutes of that game starting, I screamed. There's a jump scare that got me, and I was like, why am I playing this game in the dark? I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be scared. I hate this. So I came back to it and played this morning when it was, you know, daylight out. I had all the lights on in here, and I was able to push forward a little bit. And it is really intriguing. I think the mind place thing, where you're quite literally having a giant cork board and putting photographs and notes with push pins and tying the red string together like you see in all the serial killer tropes, and, you know, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia's riff on it and all that. I think that's a really cool way to do things. I haven't gotten to the part where I'm playing as Alan Wake. I'm still playing as Saga, the FBI agent, whose partner is the creator of the game, Sam Lake, the face of Max Payne. So Max Payne is your sidekick in the game, I guess. So I'm still playing as her. I haven't done any combat or anything yet. I'm still very early in the game, 45 minutes in, an hour in, something like that. But I really like it. It's cool. It's got a really interesting vibe to it. The mixtures of like full motion video stuff, like actual actors being filmed, not just 3D rendered stuff, is really neat. They do a lot of overlaying of things to kind of show the clues working themselves out in her head as she's kind of figuring things out. I think the dialogue is pretty snappy. It's definitely heavily influenced by Twin Peaks, which doesn't come as a surprise because their last game, Control, was definitely influenced by Twin Peaks. So you can kind of see where they're aping their stuff from in that regard. But it's not like a cheap knockoff or anything. It feels like its own thing, but you can kind of see the threads there, you know, how they got from point A to point B, with that stuff. But I am looking forward to playing more of it. Now that I got Spider-Man done, I still really need to get back to Phantom Liberty. That has really fallen off to the wayside, but you know, I am finally starting to check things off my list. I need to play some more Super Mario Wonder as well, so I can actually have some real thoughts on that besides just playing like the first hour or so. So we'll see, you know, maybe next week I'll have more Alan Wake to talk about, but that pretty much kind of covers up my experience with it so far, because I just haven't had much of one yet, other than wanting to crawl into the fetal position and have someone rock me to sleep because I am way too tense to play a scary game. So
how come this game gets to hang dong 30 seconds in, but I'm not allowed to display my body on this show? I'm tired of this double standard bullshit around here.
Yeah, they got full dong right in the beginning of the game. You can zoom in on that thing if you want to, but yeah, no nudity for you. No one needs to see your VHS slot, I think is an appropriate term to say. And then the final thing we'll talk about this week, we don't have much to say because I just didn't get enough time. But again, another game that came out that had crazy graphical demands was City Skylines II. I was able to get the game running at an appropriate frame rate, where it's certainly playable. Certainly it would be nice to be able to play things on this machine on an ultra-wide monitor in ultra-wide, but that's not going to happen. So yet another game that I have to run only at 1080p windowed. It'd be nice to crank it to 1440p, but that's just not going to happen. This game is horribly optimized. It is obviously unfinished, and they really shouldn't have put it out. But apparently it sold like crazy, so it doesn't really matter ultimately. There's enough people out there that are willing to pay for this unfinished version of the game, and just that's kind of the world we live in. I'm going to still keep poking around more and more with it. I'm going to be keeping my eye on for any patches or things that come out to see if they improve performance, throughout the rest of the year. But, that's a game that's going to be like, it's nice that I can play it if I want to right now. It does run. And I got in there and messed around with some city stuff, and it's very fun because I like that genre. I grew up playing a lot of SimCity. And this was one of my most anticipated games of the year, so I kind of have that that hype and drive to play it. But in its current state, it is not necessarily the most fun thing to play. So we'll see how that goes. But that's gonna wrap up what I played for the week, and we'll be back in just a moment with the news. All right, we are back with the news, and not too much to get into this week. It was pretty quiet. But Nintendo is doing some odd things because Nintendo does odd things. They continue their method of operation where they just actively dislike a large portion of their fan base. So this comes from Kotaku. This is the article by Ethan Gatch about Nintendo's new rules for Smash Brothers tournaments. So I'm going to read from his article here, quote, posted on October 24th on Nintendo's UK, Japan, and North American websites, the rule set strict limits on all community, and that's in quotations, tournaments. According to the new guidelines, in addition to being non-profit events, Smash tournaments would be also limited to 200 participants, unable to set prizes above $5,000, unable to have sponsors, and are forbidden from using a modified version of Nintendo games like the popular Project M hack of Super Smash Bros. Melee. Tournament organizers wouldn't be allowed to sell food, beverage, or merchandise at the events. While the guidelines don't ban all commercial tournaments outright, they do require the companies behind those events to get special licenses directly from Nintendo. However, the company states that it's up to Nintendo's sole discretion whether or not a licensee will be granted to a corporation or organization. Given Nintendo's track record, many fans are worried this will lead some of these restrictions to trickle down to bigger esports events or make holding a Smash Brothers tournament too much of a headache to even bother with in the first place. The article goes on to get some quotes from top Smash Brothers players. Let's see here. Let's go with his gamer tag, Hungrybox. Threatened to continue running his own tournaments until Nintendo's lawyers reached out to him in person. He said he's going to keep running tournaments until, quote, I will run it every fucking week until I receive word from them directly. I'm not going to stop out of fear. They have to come to me directly with the document. Until then, I'm calling their fucking bluff. Go that guy. I don't know that guy, but that guy is great. So yeah, I've heard, I'm not a Smash Brothers player. I'm not in the competitive fighting scene or anything even close to that. I ran tournaments in the past when I was working at a video game store, but those were local store run tournaments. This is before the era of live streaming. I don't know if we ever did I don't think we did cash prizes. Maybe we did. We typically did gift cards to the store, like sizable gift cards. I think we gave away like a $200, $250 gift card at one point. I know one tournament we gave away at the time the Wii U was a new system. We gave away a Wii U. So we'd done good prizes, but not like this. Like we weren't, we didn't have hundreds and hundreds of people or anything like that. So, what I did was nowhere near what these people are trying to do, where they're, trying to run these very large events to, have the best of the best compete against each other. And for Nintendo to come in and basically say, like, we don't want you enjoying our game. We don't want you to try and make $1 off our name. You just can't do that. It's so bizarre. It's such a weird thing. Like, imagine if the people that made Fortnite were just like, yeah, you can't have Fortnite tournaments. Like, that would just never happen. Like, same with like Overwatch or PUBG or League of Legends or any of these things. Like, yeah, we don't want you getting together and having fun playing our game and promoting our game to a new audience. Like, just stop that. And just no. And also, you have these tournaments with hundreds of people. You're not allowed to give them water. You're not allowed to give them food either. Just none of that. Like, it's so ass backwards. And Nintendo, for being as large as they are and as successful as they are, they've never, ever gotten an actual grasp on the internet and the culture surrounding their games. They actively oppose people wanting to play their games. Nintendo really, I think Nintendo feels like the ideal Nintendo customer is one of two people, either a 9-year-old kid whose parents have to make the purchasing decisions, or someone who, I don't think these people exist, play their games once and then just wait for the next one to come out. Like they would only, I think they ideally would want the average Switch user to only play their Switch a handful of times a year. Okay, you're allowed to play 20 races of Mario Kart, and then that's it. Now you must wait until the next Mario Kart. You're allowed to play Smash Brothers for 100 hours. Now you must wait until the next Smash Brothers. Don't talk about Smash Brothers. Don't post anything about Smash Brothers. Don't look at it when you walk by. Close your eyes. Like you're not allowed to think about this. And it's such a weird, like, draconian thing. I truly don't understand this. I don't know. I think that they're ultimately never going to be able to stop people from running tournaments. I think people are always going to find a way around it from running tournaments. I'm sure that they're going to be able to send as many cease and desist letters as they possibly want. And yes, they are a very litigious company. Nintendo has a long history of suing the shit out of people and winning. So, I mean, I don't know, but I don't think, no matter what happens, I don't think they're ever going to truly stop people from playing their games in a public competitive setting. I just don't think that's ever going to happen. But I think it is probably going to stop them from having success to the level of an Evo or International or something like that. Like, they will never be able to crawl above a certain level in the Smash Brothers, with Smash Brothers being like a big game that is played competitively. I think they're always going to be held down because of these restrictions from the top. Whereas like a company like Capcom, like, is into Evo, like, dude, we're going to reveal shit at Evo. Like, we're going to give you, new characters and show off stuff and use this as a platform to advertise our game. I think NetherRealm's done the same in the past as well. And it's so bizarre to see companies like embrace this and become successful, and Nintendo just, it's not that they don't care. It'd be one thing if they just didn't care, because then it would be like, okay, whatever, we just don't need their involvement. We can go and do what we do. But they are actively against it. Like, they are actively like protesting against people enjoying their games in a public setting where, they can run tournaments and raise money for prize pools and in all this, because, if you have these big competitive events, you have younger kids watching. It's like, man, I want to get into Smash Brothers, and they go and buy Smash Brothers, and they go buy a Switch, and they go and support this game. But, a lot of people play older Smash Brothers games, like the GameCube era stuff. Nintendo's not making any money off that stuff anymore. If you go buy a used GameCube at your local retro video game store, Nintendo's not getting any money. If you go buy a copy of what is it, Melee, I think is it Melee is the GameCube one, I think. You can tell that I was super into Smash Brothers. But I mean, if you buy a copy on eBay, Nintendo's not getting any money. But that also goes to the thing where Nintendo is so against like emulation, is Nintendo is sitting on a gold mine. Like, why are the original Pokemon games just not readily available on Nintendo's own online games service? Like, why don't they have all the Smash Brothers on there to play? They've already stolen other people's ROMs to use as their official ROMs when they put stuff out. So they're not above stealing from people. So it's just, I don't know. I don't get it. I don't understand it, but it kind of is what it is. Christian, I know you love corporate greed, so you have any thoughts on Nintendo's activities?
I applaud Nintendo for treating its fans like this. No one wants smelly Cheeto people sullying their brand. They should drive giant trucks with cow catchers on them right through Evo and put an end to all of this.
Yeah, Mr. Burns style. Yeah. You know what? Some of the people that I had to deal with at tournaments on a much smaller scale were jerks. So yeah, I think you just run over your customers. You just crash your car right into them. All right, next up is a rumor that is, who cares? But with a light news week, I guess we care. Ubisoft has delayed a, quote, large game, which people are thinking is Star Wars Outlaws, to their next fiscal year. So apparently whatever game they delayed was supposed to be out before the end of March 2024. It will not be out before March 2024. I don't think that they're talking about Star Wars Outlaws. I think they're talking about Skull and Bones, because Skull and Bones keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. I never thought, all right, and I never thought that Outlaws was coming out within the next few months. nor did I get the impression that Ubisoft thought the game was coming out in the next few months. I think this game was coming out before March. When we saw the trailers last summer, I think at the end of those trailers, it would have said like coming beginning 2024, coming early 2024, coming Q1 2024, something like that. We never got any of that. I always thought that this game was at least a year and a half away, and it was going to be a holiday 2024 game. So I think that it's probably Skull and Bones, which is delayed, because who knows if that game is ever going to come out. Now I think maybe one of the more likely scenarios, unfortunately, because it is Ubisoft after all, is that they probably next summer, during Summer Game Fest and all that good stuff, we probably get a release date for Star Wars Outlaws, let's say November 2024. I think there is a very likely chance that then gets delayed and turns into February, March 2025 or something like that. So I don't think Star Wars Outlaws is coming out anytime soon. We're talking right now at the end of October. Maybe the game is out this time next year, or is about to come out this time next year, but I would not be surprised if it ultimately slips into to 2025. But yeah, I think it was probably Skull and Bones that they were talking about there. All right, last up in our news cycle this week, Capcom. On a positive note, they are on track for an 11th straight year of growth after strong sales. Street Fighter VI has now sold 2.47 million copies. Resident Evil franchise as a whole has now sold 150 million copies. So they are having a great time this year. So for all software sales for the first half of the year, Capcom sold 22.6 million units of games. Last year at this time, or at that time, 21.3. So big jump there. Best-selling game during the first 6 months, it was Street Fighter VI. Has now sold 2.47 million copies since coming out in June. Resident Evil 4 Remake sold 1.66 million copies during the first half of the fiscal year, taking its lifetime total of 5.45 million copies. Resident Evil is their all-time best-selling franchise with that 150 million copies. Exo Primal, which came out in July, sold less than 1 million copies, but it was also available for Game Pass, so I'm assuming that if you took that out of the equation, they probably would have surpassed the 1 million copies sold. And the reason why this is kind of important to talk about is because it wasn't that long ago that the conversation of the next big video game studio to get acquired by a Sony or even an EA or Amazon, Xbox, whoever, was going to be Capcom. And I think there was a time where Capcom was probably open to being sold. Street Fighter V did not do well for them. Some of the later era Resident Evil games, 5 and 6, did not do well until they turned things around with 7. That's really when the studio, not the studio, but the company as a whole really kind of, in a big way, turned around, was when they kind of figured out what they needed to do to push Resident Evil back to the top of the mainstream with going first person and really cranking up the horror and tension in those games. And they certainly figured out what to do with Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter 6, one of the best games to come out this year, and one of the best fighting games of the past 5-6 years, easy, if not the past 10 years. And the story very quickly turned from, hey, any day now we could feasibly see an acquisition announcement for Capcom, to now we've had reports where companies did reach out to Capcom, and Capcom told them no. They said, we're good. We don't need to be acquired. We are doing just fine. And now it seems like they are doing better than they have in a very long time. 11 straight years of growth is huge. Most companies would plateau at some point. But they are just on the up and up. Now, obviously, we'll see if they can keep the momentum up. I don't need to be super negative, but they've settled on this formula for Resident Evil. How soon before it becomes a little stale and maybe doesn't sell as well? But I do think that they've figured out what they needed to do to keep that series fresh. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Street Fighter 6, we're not going to see like a Street Fighter 7 anytime soon, by any stretch of the imagination. But they're going to be able to keep that game going. It's going to do very well in the competitive scene. That will drive more sales. They've got a roadmap for characters coming out and all that good stuff. And I think they're going to be on the right track with everything. So it's cool to see, in a year where a lot of the stories surrounding developers and studios and publishers and the like were layoffs or closings. I didn't bring it up this week, but Media Molecule just laid off a bunch of people this past week. Now that Dreams was ending. So I think it was between 20 and 30% of their workforce just lost their job. It's been a lot of negative stuff. And I guess to a degree, you can consider the Blizzard acquisition by Microsoft a negative thing. I still think it's going to be a net positive for the video game industry, because I think they're going to clean up a lot of the toxicity in the workplace at Activision and Blizzard. And I think they're also going to kind of kick them in the ass to start making games on a more regular basis that aren't Call of Duty every year and Diablo and all that. Like, hey, you have other IPs, let's explore. So I think ultimately it'll end up being a good thing, but I can certainly see why people would see that as a negative. So it's nice to see kind of a shining example of success with what Capcom has been able to do and pull themselves out of, I wouldn't say a tailspin, but, I guess from a business perspective, if you were talking, openly that like, hey, us being acquired is very near possibility, business-wise, then it is a little bit of a tailspin, right? So I think it's good to see that they have been able to pull through all of that and move forward in a good direction. So yeah, that's going to pretty much wrap up the show. So coming up this week, I don't think there's really much. Let me look at my release calendar here, because we are getting down to just the final games of the year. So Jusant comes out tomorrow on Halloween. That's a Game Pass game, so maybe we'll take a look at that. And then RoboCop is out on Thursday, it looks like. So maybe we'll get some RoboCop footage this week. I was thinking about for Halloween, maybe I would film some Alan Wake. I'm not going to promise that, because if the footage doesn't look good when I capture it, because it doesn't look great while I'm playing it, I'm not going to put that up. So maybe we'll see on that one. But yeah, maybe something on Jusant, maybe something with RoboCop, we'll see. And then the following week is Like a Dragon Gaiden, that made it erase his name. I assume we'll probably do something with that. And then Modern Warfare comes out next week. And my plan for that is to probably stream some of it, some multiplayer or something like that. But other than that, I've talked about, I guess we'll get into some personal stuff. I've talked about how I kind of started taking some classes recently to make a change in my career. I have finished those classes. So I'm at the point now where I need to do a lot of studying. I need to do a bunch of practice tests to get ready. And then I have to go eventually, take my final exam and all that stuff. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time this week studying and getting ready for that, because I don't want to fail the test. I passed through the course pretty well. I very rarely got questions wrong as I was going through, the end of chapter questions. It's like, hey, how much do you remember the last 3 hours of you learning? So I was doing pretty well there. So I kind of want to keep that going. And so, yeah, so it'll probably be a little bit limited as I get through that. And then I will say that this channel is going to change quite a bit once I get up and running after doing all of this, because I have to go through a bunch of training at the new job, which means that I will have very little free time, because it's like, I think I have to go through a 7-week or an 8-week training program. So that's going to be, obviously that's going to be top priority over this. This doesn't make me any money, and that's going to make me money. So I got to go where the money goes. So we'll see how things go over the course of the holidays and all that. But, yeah, we'll definitely have some stuff up on the channel. I've actually, in what free time I have had over this past week, I have actually been getting back to work on the script for the next Perfect Reload video. No promises that it's going to be out anytime soon, but I would really like to get that script done and start working on it soon. Just for the personal satisfaction of, I would really like to try and have it done by the end of the year, because I only did one of those this year, and I'd like to have at least 2 done. So maybe we'll have that to look forward to. Maybe that'll be my Christmas gift to all of y'all. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. Christian, anything you got to say? You got to get off your chest before we head out?
Halloween is tomorrow, one of the great American holidays. I'm going to get blackout drunk, throw up in a candy basket, and down a pallet of Sour Patch Kids, then go out for a night on the town.
Right on, man. I'm going to go the next day and buy a bunch of discount Reese's Peanut Butter Cups and see if they have any cheap wigs at Spirit Halloween. So that's going to wrap it up for me. Take it easy, everybody. We'll see you again real soon.